we determine our core and non-core business. I mentioned earlier about make sure we stop the bleeding as the first thing that we need to do. And then look at our businesses. What sort of core businesses do we have? What are the non-core segments? What do we want to keep? We've got revenue and we've got cost. And on both sides, we can see that you've got to ask yourself, what is the problem that the company is facing? Is it an industry problem or is it a company-specific problem? Because if we talk about industry problem, industry, of course, they're cyclical. I know we know some business, they are cyclical and some are secular or systemic. Revenues could be under threat. I think you've got to look at your lines of products or offerings that you have and what are the ones that you can continue to provide to your clients. So then we have an honest assessment of the EBITDA multiples. What sort of earnings can we get over the next couple of years? I know we know COVID times, the situation is it could be 2 years before we find a vaccine. We've got to live with this 2 years and maybe a few years after that. So what sort of productivity do we have on the next few years? We must develop a roadmap within a maximum period of 2 months. That's the most. We really don't have time. And it fits in with the CDRC requirement as well. CDRC, when you go to them, they want something up within 2 months.
If you look over the past 40 years, the majority of value has actually transitioned into intangible assets. And those intangible assets are everywhere. Most companies have them as platforms or relationships, designs, networks, content, brands. These are what we call the blood that actually makes companies profitable. And sometimes they don't fully understand what intangible assets they actually own. It might be the company culture, it might be data sets that are hidden away. And if you don't understand the assets that they own, then they can't actually pull out all the extent of the risks. And that will have impact on their financial results if they don't understand where that comes from. And if they don't know what they have, then of course it's hard to unlock value, especially in a time like COVID, where you might need to think about pivoting, changing directions, partnering with a competitor to stay in business, or restructuring to make sure that you can continue business. But when you actually put in intangible assets into the mix, you can start to leverage strategic value more effectively. You can actually start to see, well, what do these assets look like in the hands of a bigger player? Instead of restructuring and keeping my team the same way, what if we split it into two and licensed one of our businesses and ran the other business? Intangible assets can be a significant turbocharger, but they can also be a significant risk if they're not understood or valued properly.
But we talk about saving the company because we think there's something more to it than just the plant and machinery. Intangible assets, use that phrase, but this idea that somehow, for the greater good of the economy, we shouldn't let this thing just die.
A lot of inquiries on this is the 50 billion ringgit Jamin guarantee facility. Firstly, what are the criteria for companies or corporations to qualify to borrow from this facility?
Or 20 million upwards, up to 500 million, which means it's not an SME facility. SMEs are being taken care of through other means. I think
SRF
funds. That's right. So this is really for large corporations and it's for those affected by COVID. I guess to make the case you're affected by COVID can't be too difficult. If you show what your revenues were pre-COVID and show your revenues post-COVID, I think it's quite easy to make the case that you have been affected by COVID. And again, working capital. I think short of something which is a major acquisition or starting a new line of plant machinery, I'm sure most things can come within working capital. So it's 80% guarantee by Dana Jamin. So if you lend $100, Dana Jamin will guarantee 80, and the bank still has to bear the risk of the $20.
So in terms of business plan viability, I think there are 4 broad areas or 4 key attributes that we'll say that we look at for any business, in particular distressed business. So it's not much different from a going concern business in that sense, except for, clearly I think there are additional steps that you need to take to look at distressed business. The first one is clearly the business fundamentals. Second, for us as a private equity, is the growth opportunity. Third is the strength of management team. Fourth is exit opportunity. I think we always have to look at this because ultimately you can buy great business, but it's not an exitable business, right? And then when we look at the business fundamental itself, we look at the financial projections, which are core to PE valuation and goes beyond tool for valuation. For private equity houses like us, like I said, financial projections are key. It's not so much just to value the business, but really to understand the driver of the business itself. We look at the validation of management projections, understanding of their financial projections and driver for growth. We look at the debt level and repayment terms post-restructuring, capital injection required. As a private equity, for us, it's also important for us to look at identification of potential value creation levers. Can it grow beyond its current business model? What are the things that we can do to expand the business into adjacency, either new business segment or geographies?